One thing I wouldn't do is brief designers based on emotion. And the reason why is because it can be very difficult for them to work with and very misleading.
Hello and welcome to Brand Tuned, a podcast on brand management that covers trademarks and IP as they're intrinsic to brand equity. I'm your host, Shireen Smith, author of Brand Tuned. Writing this led to Byron Sharp's evidence-based research stressing distinctiveness over differentiation, which I largely agree with, though not totally. Hence our tagline, Sharp Branding. My guest today is Phil Barden, author of the book Decoded, The Science Behind Why We Buy, which bridges the gap between the worlds of marketing and decision science. Phil has more than 25 years of experience in marketing, having held senior positions in high-profile companies, including as VP of Brand Development for T-Mobile in Europe. Phil, welcome to the Brand Tuned podcast.
Thanks, Sharon. It's a pleasure to be here.
Tell us a bit more about your background, business, the story behind it, and all that.
Sure. Yeah, I spent, as you said, 25 years in client-side marketing, mostly with Unilever, and then Diageo and then T-Mobile. And I felt probably a bit too arrogantly that I knew marketing. I knew how brands worked, why we bought them, why we didn't buy them, how communications worked or didn't, and things like this. And the reason I changed career, it was a major life style change and career change, was because I came up against a bit of a problem. I had commissioned research around Europe in about 12 European countries when I was VP for T-Mobile. And the results we were getting back, this was foundational research to understand how we could relaunch the brand and what the brand positioning could be. And to be honest, it was a waste of money and a huge amount of money and a considerable amount of time and personal investment in convincing the business to run this research, because the results just didn't make sense to anyone in the market. And I was scratching my head thinking, well, this is potentially risky for me as an individual, because I'd taken the business on a journey to commit to this. And someone introduced me to a couple of guys from the company I now work with and said, you should talk to them. They're very interesting. They have a completely different perspective on life. And I met these guys. One is a neuroscientist and the other is a cognitive psychologist. And we chatted about why people buy brands and how advertising works. And I tried them out on a few things, just a little, what I thought were tricky questions. And they answered them immediately and in a way that I'd never heard before, using language I'd never heard, and explanations that seemed totally plausible and intuitively right. And I said to them, how do you know all this stuff? And they looked at me quite dumbfounded and said, but how come you don't know all this stuff? Because what we're doing is using constructs that everyone in neuropsychology is aware of. And we're basing our comments and observations on empirical studies that have been peer reviewed and published. And it's amazing to us that the commercial world is ignorant of these. And that was a real eye-opener. And the more I talked to them, I then commissioned them to work on the relaunch. And we did some research using their approach and their methods, which had grown out of the fields of social psychology. And we're using what's called implicit testing. This is a testing methodology that relies on very fast reaction time. And it's designed to get around the control system in the brain, because what they knew as scientists is that there's a massive difference between what people say and what people do. And what I'd been the victim of with my previously commissioned research was relying on what people said. And they just kind of laughed at this and said, well, you really need, if you want to get to the truth about what really drives behavior, you need to change the approach. And the result of that was the T-Mobile brand relaunch around Europe, which was enormously successful and led directly in the UK to an ad which has become famous. It was a flash mob dance at London's Liverpool Street Station. And that one ad grew sales by 49%. It tripled brand consideration. It doubled footfall into T-Mobile retail stores. It's got more YouTube views than any John Lewis Christmas ad, just to put it in context. And frankly, I and the rest of the company were totally taken by surprise and said to these guys, look, this is amazing. Look at the results. And they kind of shrugged and said, well, what did you expect? We have deliberately built into that ad motivators of behavior. So why are you surprised when it motivates behavior? And that was another real eye-opener for me, and quite a smack in the face of a lot of things that I'd learned and mental models and paradigms that I had. And the net result of that was I said to them, well, look, I'd be really interested in working with you guys, because what you do is fundamental to marketing, because marketing is essentially about behavior change. We want people to buy our brand, choose our brand in preference to another, or buy more, or talk about it, become an advocate, or whatever it might be. And who better to understand human behavior than fields of academia and science that have been studying it for decades? So I quit my role and I set the company up in the UK, because the founders were and are based in Germany. And that was just over 10 years ago. And we've been growing organically since then. We've now got an office in the US and work with some of the world's biggest brand owners. So it was a real journey for me, having to reshape a lot of my understanding about human behavior and about what brands are in essence. But now it just makes so much sense. And you've seen a massive growth of this whole behavioral science field, passing into government, public health, public policy, as well as in the commercial side as well. So that's kind of a potted history of my journey.
Right. So what type of clients do you typically serve, and in what contexts do you get involved? Mostly
brand owners. The majority of what we do are business to consumer brands, and they can be products or services. We do some business to business work as well. But yeah, it's mostly people who are trying to build brands, advertise brands, repackage brands, and innovate with brands as well. We've done some not-for-profit work. We've also done some governmental work and public policy work, but the majority is with brand owners.
Right. So it's products that involve low decision, or whatever the expression is, like supermarkets and such like, rather than which university you're going to send your children to, for example.
It's mostly purchased products and services, yes. So it's things that range from, if you think about the characteristics of any purchase decision, which have to do with the level of your involvement and motivation and interest and personal risk in the decision, the complexity of choice with which you are faced, time with which you have to make a decision, and also whether you can focus on a task at hand or whether you are being overloaded with tasks. So those are really the four fundamental characteristics of any purchase decision. So it could be as trivial as buying a chocolate bar for 50p in a supermarket, or as complex as buying a car or an insurance policy. Generally not going to be more sort of life things like which university should I send my child to, although it has to be said that the principles of branding do apply there as well. So Oxbridge has a cachet to it and stands for something compared to other universities or higher education institutions. So we kind of segment life as well in the same way that we do with other things that we purchase.
Okay, so when people are buying something like legal services, presumably it's more than that system one thinking comes into it. They will think more deeply about it than if they're buying a cereal, for example.
Yeah, I mean, people make a mistake thinking this system one and system two are binary. They're not. They work in an intertwined way. It's true that system one never sleeps, it's always on, but the degree to which system two engages depends on those characteristics that I mentioned. So if I'm highly motivated in the purchase, so maybe it's a category that has great interest to me, or the risk involved in the purchase, either from a financial point of view or a personal point of view, if that is high rather than low, then system two will play a greater role in the decision making. And that's why when we're making big decisions like which university should I choose or which car should I buy, we will be driven by system one. So system one will have a set of associations that it's formed over many, many years that says brand X of a car stands for certain things and says something about me in the same way a certain university will. But we will also seek out information. In that, we won't seek out lots of information when we're buying a chocolate bar, probably, but we will when we're buying a car because we're spending several tens of thousands of pounds, so that the risk to us is much, much higher. Now, the information that we seek, which system two kind of digests and reflects on, may serve in some cases to rationalize the decision that's already been formed by system one. So I may go for a certain car brand. I had a lovely example with the finance director of a car company, and when I was explaining the system one and system two, he said, I totally disagree with you, because when I last bought a company car, I did lots of research and I had an available budget, and I looked at what I could afford for that budget. So I was making trade-off decisions between the model that I wanted, or the trim, the specification that I wanted. And those are all system two decisions. It's very reflective. And I said, yes, you're absolutely right. You have just characterized a system two decision. But why were you going through all of that reflection and thinking about it? And he said, so I could have a BMW on my drive. And so actually what had driven him was the brand choice, what BMW made him feel and how it made him look. So what he didn't say was, I want to show off to my neighbors, because actually what the more psychological goals that he was meeting by that decision were about status and self-esteem and a sense of pride. And in order to achieve that, his system one had kind of already decided on a BMW, and then system two was doing the post-rationalization and helping him make the choice. But he thought that he was going through a very, very reflective process. So he was making the best choice. And for him it was, and that's absolutely fine. But that just shows the difference between system one involvement and system two involvement.
Right, that's interesting. An aspect of your book that caught my attention was how you would brief designers using the implicit and explicit goals of the brand instead of simply asking designers to convey emotion without defining how they should do that. Can you illustrate how you would use these ideas if you were branding a service-based business, maybe?
Yeah, for sure. One thing I wouldn't do is brief designers based on emotion. And the reason why is because it can be very difficult for them to work with, and very misleading. Because if you think about, what emotions do you want people? You want people to feel good. You want them to feel joy or happy or whatever when they see something, a design, graphic design, or a service design or something. But how do you choose which emotion, and how should that emotion be activated? Because there are millions of ways in which we feel happy or we feel joyful, and which is right for the category, which is right for the brand. So it can lead you off into a level of ambiguity that is not helpful. And this is where I found the construct of goals to be much more helpful for designers, and ultimately, as a business owner, you get closer to what you want. So when we think about goals, people buy products and services to achieve goals. That is widely accepted in science and academia as the motivating force in our lives. And goals can be functional, so it helps me do a certain job, and that's terribly important. If you have a broadband service and it's fast and it's reliable, but they're critical, absolutely critical. If it falls over all the time, and if you don't deliver the speeds that you promise, you'll go out of business very quickly. You have absolutely got to deliver those functional goals. They're like table stakes, if you like. But there's another level of goal as well, and this is the more social / emotional / psychological goal. And like the example I just gave with the finance director about the BMW, they are not ones to which we generally, as humans, have introspective access. And these are things that can be tested empirically using these implicit testing methods that I mentioned earlier. But to give you an example, using a detergent as a product, you may have an ingredient in your detergent which is called an optical brightener, and this makes whites appear whiter. So your functional goal could be something like it's brighter whites, or it washes whiter. But that's not sufficient, particularly in categories where you have a lot of parity at product performance or even service performance. And you very quickly, even if you get a slight advantage, the playing field is leveled very quickly. I remember this from my T-Mobile days. Everyone was always fighting for a technological advantage. 4G was heralded as kind of the savior for what is now the EE brand. But we knew it was only going to be a matter of time before Vodafone and O2 and 3 and everybody else also had 4G services. So everyone catches up and the playing field levels again. So then where do you go? How do you compete? How do you make yourself distinctive? And ultimately, how do you charge a premium for what might otherwise be perceived as a commodity? And this is where the level of social, emotional, psychological goals can help, because you could start talking about how there's a link between something washing whiter or brighter white and demonstrating that a parent or caregiver cares about her children or the people they're caring for. So there's a bit about caring for others. It might give the person doing the laundry a sense of pride, a sense of that I'm doing my best. So these types of goals are not only incredibly motivating for human beings, but they link intuitively to the functional level and the feature level, whether it's a product ingredient or the characteristic or feature of a service. So you get this what we call a value chain that links all of these elements together. And if you can describe that value chain to a designer, and let's use a detergent example again. Look, we've got this ingredient. It makes whites appear whiter. We therefore have a functional goal of this washes whiter, and that ladders to the social, emotional, psychological goal of a sense of pride and demonstrating that I'm caring for others. There's your value chain. Now, that sort of thing is something that a designer can work with. Emotion comes in when we as human beings achieve a goal or not. And what the psychologists say is we experience emotion whenever the likelihood of achieving a goal changes. So if I achieve a goal, I feel good, I feel happy, I feel joy. If I'm not achieving a goal, I feel sad, I feel angry, I feel frustrated. So it's like a feedback mechanism that nature has developed to help us achieve our goals and help us learn for the future. So I know when I do something, or I use brand X or service X to achieve what I want to set out, what I set out to achieve, I feel good. I feel I've kind of accomplished something, and the motivational loop is complete. And that feedback loop then helps me learn for the future, that in future I will use that service, or I will choose brand X over brand Y because it's more instrumental in helping me achieve my goal. So that's where I think it's enormously helpful for designers, because that sets them off down a track. Well, if I know that what I'm trying to achieve is to show that I care, or show that this instills a sense of pride, or that I'm doing my best, that's much more inspiring and a much greater creative springboard for a designer than just saying we want people to feel good, or we want people to feel happy when they use our product.
Yeah, makes sense. Where do you get the social and emotional goals from? Is that Maslow's hierarchy?
No, absolutely not. No, and Maslow has hierarchy is something that psychologists have not used for decades and would not use. It was a construct that very quickly superseded by neuropsychology. No, the source for the goals comes from an amalgamation of different neuroscientific and in particular social psychological fields of study. The goals themselves split into two areas, one of which is known as prevention, and this type of goal has to do with risk avoidance and keeping hold of what we have. It's like hunkering down and not taking risks. It's about playing a game in order not to lose, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
The other type of goal are what are called promotional goals, and that's the opposite. That's about taking risks and playing to win, and going out and facing the world and tackling challenges in order to meet one's goals. So that's a basic distinction between the type of goal. Within those areas, there are three primary drivers in the brain, and this is linked back to neurotransmitters and hormones. So within the prevention area, the key driver is what we call security. Now, security is just a blanket term, if you like, but within security, we have goals such as caring for ourselves, caring for others, familiarity, belonging, tradition, trust, warmth, closeness, things like this. In the promotional field, there are two other very distinct drivers. One we call excitement, and again, this is a blanket term. Excitement covers things like energy, fun, variety, creativity, curiosity. It's about change. It's very outer directed. And the other primary driver we call autonomy, and again, that's a catch-all term to cover goals such as pride, power, leadership, performance, prestige or status, achievement, and perfection. So those are the three primary drivers: excitement, autonomy, and security. There are other goals which are like hybrids of those. So if we took a hybrid of autonomy and excitement, we describe a goal of adventure. And again, adventure is a catch-all term for things like courage and rebellion and risk, independence, dynamism, individuality. So in my book Decoded, there's a whole chapter devoted to goals, which explains this in more detail. Also introduces another two fields, if you like. We call each one a field. There's another field called enjoyment and another field called discipline. So these goals have come from neuropsychological studies, several different sources, and they all coalesce. They all tell the same story about what motivates human behavior, and they are goals that we have tested and validated quantitatively around the world, across categories, across demographies as well. As being valid motivators. So that's where they come from.
So how would you approach setting the brand strategy and taking these goals into account?
What we normally do is, when we're working with a client, is you can either do this depending on how long the client has been in business and what the nature is of their product or service. You can get some way through intuition. You can get some way through talking to people who've been in the business for a long time. The reason why that is valid is because their own implicit patterns and memory, their own system one associations have been built over a long period of time, and their gut feel, which is a very good way of describing system one, which is their intuition. Is normally very, very powerful. So you can go some way to describing the category and their brand and perhaps their competitors just by talking to them. And maybe if they have some previous research as well, we would normally go through that. That's okay. It's not the best way to do it. The best way to do it is actually to do some quantitative research, because then what you can do using these goals is to profile the category very precisely. And we use up to about 70 different goals when we're profiling a category and the brands in a category. So that gives you, using this scientifically valid method that I mentioned of implicit testing, which is, people might think, oh, this is going to be terribly expensive because it's sort of cutting edge. It's not terribly expensive. It's nowadays 95% plus of it is done online against whatever target audience a business has, and it can be done very quickly and very cost effectively. But the insight you get from this level of validity is, in my experience, unparalleled. So you can profile a category and find out what are the drivers of the category, because ultimately the reason you do this is because people buy categories first. So I want legal advice in a certain area, right? That's the category. Then I will choose the brand. I need detergent to clean my laundry. I need broadband, whatever it might be. We always make a category decision first. So we profile a category in order to provide the context and a frame of reference to understand how well the brands are serving category goals or not. So we profile the category first, then we profile the brands in the category, including obviously the client's brand. And by doing that, you can see to what extent the brands are relevant. So what overlap is there between the goals that people associate with the brands and the goals that motivate people's purchase in a category. And you can see to what extent brands are distinctive as well. So do they own category relevant goals uniquely or not? Or does a competitor? And you can do various data analyses on these, correlations, cluster analysis, and other forms of analysis to look at where the gaps are for your brand that you could credibly move into, maybe by stretching the brand, maybe by launching a new variant or a new brand, because ultimately what we want is growth, right? We want to cover more of the category goals or the occasions on which those goals are relevant. We want to cover those with our brand. So that's what we would recommend, and that's now with some of our clients. They use this globally to measure brand equity and brand health, and to track their brand equity and health over time, as well as using this as a foundation to build not only strategy, but then to test your execution against the strategy. So with T-Mobile, we did exactly this research. We found where on we put these goals into a map, a two-dimensional map with 6 spaces. We found out exactly where on the map we wanted to position T-Mobile. Then the question was, how do you do that? How do you actually shift associations in order to reposition your brand? And how you do that is by all the touch points that you create as a brand. So advertising, sponsorship, PR, promotions, packaging, new initiatives, whatever you may do represents a touch point that effectively is sending a signal to a person's brain, and that person's brain will decode that signal, and it may or may not have the goal associations that you want it to. Now, hopefully, well, not just hopefully, it will, if you follow this path, as I talked about with briefing designers. The designers will then get what it is you're trying to achieve, so they can work with that. And then when the person sees that design, that will be decoded as having meaning and association that you put into the brief. And that's the beauty of closing what I call the strategy to execution implementation gap, because very often a gap it opens up between the wonderfully crafted and honed strategy and then your execution, and it's no one's fault except you haven't got this tight knit understanding of goals. You've got goals that represent your strategy, and you need to signal those goals through your execution. And when you do, then you start to deliver your strategy, and you start to create or change or modify associations with your brand. And that's how brands can reposition. That's how brands can evolve over time.
Right, that sounds terribly complicated. So given that 96% of businesses are micro businesses, is there anything useful that somebody can do more cost effectively, possibly for themselves, to get a handle on some of this?
Yeah, of course. I'm sorry if it's come across as sounding complicated. In essence, it's not. And the best examples that one can see of this is where you have the founder of a business who lives and breathes the brand. So he or she knows what the brand stands for. They've just got an intuitive system one feel for what's right and what's not. So when they see an execution, when they see like a new design, they'll know in their gut immediately if it fits or not, if it's right. Is it on brand or is it off brand? And for people who don't have research budgets, that's the way to do it. Just prototypically does what you're seeing from a designer or another agency. Maybe it's a promotional idea or an event idea or something like that, or some PR. Does it prototypically stand for what you want it to stand for? And our brains are brilliant at doing this, absolutely brilliant. And just to give you an example, in 1910, a German psychologist went around the world showing people 2 different shapes, just 2-dimensional line drawings. One of them was a very soft, rounded shape, a bit like a fluffy cloud. The other was a very angular shape, very sort of spiky. And he said to everyone he showed these shapes to, one of these shapes is called maluba and the other is called taquete. Which is which? And about 100% of people said, well, maluba is the soft round shape and taquete is the angular spiky shape. Why? Because it just feels right. Okay, our brain associates the soft sound of maluba with a soft, round, curved shape, and taquete is harsh and staccato, and that fits intuitively with an angular, spiky shape. And that mechanism, that's exactly what we're doing when we're judging work. The key point for the small business owner or founder is, do I want a Maluba or a Takete? And if I can brief whoever it is to say, my brand is Maluba, right? This is everything I know and feel about the brand. Then when I'm responding to proposals or visuals or whatever it is, ideas even that people propose to me, then I'll know whether what they're showing me is Maluba or not, because it just feels right, or it doesn't. And you just know it intuitively as a human being. It's what we're very, very good at. And the longer somebody stays with a brand, that's why I mentioned before about questioning people in a business who've worked in a business for a long time, because they build these intuitive patterns. They know what feels right. They might not be able to articulate it perfectly, but they will get a visceral reaction as soon as they see something that fits or doesn't fit with their brand and what they're trying to do.
I was recently trying to get an icon for my brand, a visual hammer. This has been something I've been trying to do since 2014. And the designer who rebranded us then said that she couldn't see a way of including that, and I accepted it. And so recently I was trying to get another designer to add one. And he totally wanted to redo the whole branding, the colors, the fonts, everything. I didn't really want to do that, so we parted company. But I'm just wondering, what do you think? Do you think it's possible for someone to just add an icon? He thought not. If you don't have a visual hammer already, that you need to start from scratch.
If you don't have anything already, then yes, it's perfectly valid to start from scratch and use that as an opportunity to create some meaning and identity. Because when the brain perceives anything, colors, shapes, words, whatever it might be, we will, within milliseconds, assign meaning to it based on what we've learned throughout the course of our lives. If you're starting with a green field, you absolutely can do that. If you already have something, so maybe you already have a strong a brand or service, or you already have some sort of visual identity, then it becomes a lot more difficult, because the question is, how do I retain sufficient of what I already have to firstly provide recognition for those people who know the brand, and secondly, maybe to evolve it in a way that I want, in a direction, or to imbue it with some meaning that I also want to do. What's terribly difficult to do when you've got an established identity is to scrap it and start again. This is really throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And this is the example I give in Decoded with the Tropicana orange juice brand, where they completely changed the packaging design. The name was the same, of course, and the dimensions were the same, but the surface graphics changed dramatically. The brief to the designer was that the design should appear fresher, more modern, and cleaner than the original design. And the designer absolutely achieved all of those things. But the problem was that it was no longer recognizable as Tropicana. So people skipped by it in the supermarket. They assumed it was out of stock, because what they did was they lost all of the what we call diagnostic codes that people use to instantly recognize something. And this is the way that caricatures work. You may never have seen a particular picture before, but there's sufficient diagnostic codes in there for you to get what it is immediately.
I loved your book, all the examples of how people see things in a blurry way. They don't really completely as one imagines. So.
No, and that's and a lot of people don't realize that particularly when it's probably most acute when we're walking down the street or we're walking through a shop, that the majority of our vision is peripheral, 120 degrees of vision, only 2 degrees of which is pin sharp and focused, so-called foveal vision. And when we're walking down a street, people might have very complicated posters with lots of text on. You just can't read text in peripheral vision. So when you're reading a book, if you stare in the margin, you can't read the text a couple of inches either side. It's just blurred. So when you're designing something, you need to take account of the fact that it has to be perceptible under less than ideal visual conditions. And that's one of the reasons Tropicana fell down, that under blur conditions, I have no clue what this is. It just looks like generic own label supermarket orange juice. It's certainly not Tropicana anymore. So yes, that's one of the sort of quick and dirty tests that people can do for free, by the way. If you have PowerPoint or some similar graphics package on a computer or a Mac, then you just blur the image using drawing tools and show it to someone who doesn't know what it is, and just show it to them very quickly and say, what's that? And see if they get what it is. And that's a very quick and dirty test to see how perceptible and how accurate people are at decoding what it is you intend. We get colors under peripheral vision, we get shapes under peripheral vision, but forget about text and forget about detail. You just cannot perceive it.
Very interesting. Well, thank you very much for appearing on the podcast. I just wonder what your next steps are. Are you going to write another book?
I'm right now in the process of updating and revising Decoded for a number of reasons. I'm putting in a section about business to business because people said there's a lot of business to consumer examples, but what about B2B? Surely that's different. And of course, at one level, it's not, because we don't have different brains. We don't swap brains when we go to the office. So that there are fundamental principles that, of course, are identical. But there are some real differences with B2B in terms of decision making and the constraints and the context under which decision making happens. So there'll be a bit about that. There'll be more about emotion and how it fits with goals. And there'll be some update on some studies that we've done, in particular one we did last year now on COVID and what people's unmet needs were during lockdown. So I'm sure that will be of interest to people. But again, from a goal perspective, so that's what I'm working on right now.
So when will this new edition be out?
I'm not sure entirely. I haven't got a timeline yet from the publisher. It's going to be paperback, which is different because the book currently is hardback. So I'm hoping it'll be quite a fast production process, but it's certainly going to be probably early, maybe second quarter this year.
Oh, great. Well, thank you very much then, Phil. Bye.
You're welcome.
That's it for this week. Do subscribe to the BrandTuned newsletter to get weekly updates. I'd also love to get your feedback. Just send me an email to info@brandtune.com. Finally, if you liked the episode, please do share it with your friends and colleagues and review it on iTunes or whichever platform you use to listen to podcasts. If you leave us a 5-star review, it means more people will listen and we can spread the word much more quickly about the podcast. Thank you and bye for now.